Good afternoon. I'm Krista Terrell, President of the Arts and Science Council. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for Beyond the Soundbites, a virtual community listees cultural equity report. I'm pleased to have our hosts with us today, Kristen Hills Bradbury, a nonprofit consultant, and Dr. Ricky A. Woods, a community advocate and senior pastor of First Baptist Church West. And I'm going to turn it to Dr. Woods to explain why we are here at First Baptist Church West.
Well, we're here at First Baptist Church West today because First Baptist is the oldest African-American Baptist church in Mecklenburg County, and it has always been engaged and involved in community advocacy since its very beginning. We've hosted numerous groups, and we also serve as a site for the cultural blocks that Arts and Science provides, and we're excited to be able to offer our space as a place to have this conversation today.
And First Baptist Church West has also been a site for helping people during the pandemic. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, during the pandemic, we started providing food to persons experiencing food insecurity. And also children that are involved in the school system have been able to come to our site to have access to the broadband to be able to help with their homework and homework assistance. And we're excited about both of those programs and how we've been serving those in need in our community during the pandemic. And then finally, through the coronavirus, and we've also served as a vaccine site on multiple occasions.
Thank you. I'm also happy to report that Dr. Woods, Kristen, and myself are fully vaccinated, so wanted to share that with you regarding space. We're inviting you into this space who are important to us, listen and learn and hear directly from you, and incorporate that learning into our cultural equity work. Centering community in everything that we do is core to ASC's work and really lead by listening. Storyteller and teaching artist and 2021 Creative Renewal Fellow, Kaylee Ferguson, said, quote, "I've been involved with the ASC for 40 years. Only in the last 10 have I been able to forgive them for having a community. I now see genuine changes, and I'm hopeful for the future." Samuel Davis, Barbara Ferguson, Ruth Sloan, Manoj Kesavan, Tommy Robinson, TJ Reddy, Clara Jones, Carlos Alexis Cruz, Ramona Moore Big Eagle, Juan Logan, Maddie Marshall, Ruby Britt Height, Corey Mitchell, Tiffany White, Milan Den, Aisha McMillan Cravata, John Strayhorn, Irisol Gonzalez, Lal Vishen, Gladys Gomez, John Chin, Hannah Hassan, Larry Sellers, Tyrone Jefferson, Valeda Fullwood. These are just a few of the thousands of diverse creatives that have shaped Charlotte-Mecklenburg's cultural landscape. Today's listening session is to center and honor and protect the voices and experiences of Alana and BIPOC artists, organizations, and residents. Every person here today has a stake in the conversation, and I encourage you to participate respectfully in the chat. Speaking of the chat, because we are on YouTube, we really you to comments and feelings using the chat on YouTube. And also want to recap, we'll put in the chat all of the grounding terms that were shown on the loop as you entered today's session. Before we begin into our cultural equity discussion, I do want to address the situation that is going on with the City of Charlotte and funding for the cultural sector. As I am really excited about increased funding for the cultural sector because ASC has been advocating for increased funding for a very long time, we are excited about that. However, we do have concerns that there has not been a public process to the recommendations from the city manager that has included ASC creatives across the community, as well as organizations of all sizes, and more importantly, the residents of the city of Charlotte. So again, wanted to address that. We know that they will adopt their budget on June the 4th, but anything you can do to advocate for that, as well as go to ASC's website to learn more about what we are advocating for an open process as it relates to funding for the arts and cultural sector. But today's conversation is really around cultural equity and ASC's work to ensure cultural equity in our community. The other thing is that ASC has been working for a very long time, over the past about 7 years, on our cultural equity work. I think there is a perception that just because we published this inaugural report that we're beginning to do this work. But we started this work many years ago, and this was the first process of publicly explaining that work and sharing the work that we're doing. But we're going to discuss that report in detail today. So now we're going to turn it over to Dr. Woods to have a conversation.
Well, thank you, Krista, for that lead-in. And one of the things that I was excited about being able to do was to serve as an outside reader for the equity report. And there were a number of things that I learned reading that report. I had no idea of the discrepancy in funding for so many organizations, in particularly, example, the Charlotte Children's Theater versus the African American Children's Theater. But then I was also excited to learn the kinds of changes that ASC is planning to implement to make our community more inclusive as it relates to arts.
And to add to that, the reason why we created the cultural equity was, one, ASC's board of directors adopted a cultural equity statement in June of 2019. When they said, if we're committed to doing this work, it is important that we publicly share with the community our progress on that work. So we began creating the cultural equity report in the summer of 2020 and published the report in February of 2021. What is important about the report, and I think has been kind of a culture in Charlotte, Charlotte really likes to talk about the shiny and new things that are going on. At times we don't like to talk about our history. But it was really important for me, for Jeet Bryant, who was president at the time, as well as our cultural equity work group, to explain our history and what we have done to become, what we have done in the past and what we are doing forward to become a more equitable organization.
Just share the data.
Sure. Well, the reason why it was important to apologize, again, we have had a history of being inequitable as it relates to funding to organizations as well as to creative individuals. And one example and a story that I want to share is regarding the Afro-American Children's Theater and the Children's Theater of Charlotte, work that ASC has done that led to inequitable funding. In 1981, Barbara Ferguson created the Afro-American Children's Theater and founded it on the campus of Johnson C. Smith University, which is personally dear to my heart because I am a graduate of JCSU. And she created the organization because she did not And so out of that, she created the organization. Johnson C. Smith even served as a fiscal agent for the organization, opened their classrooms and facilities for rehearsals. They even performed in Biddle Auditorium. So then they connected with a woman at the Arts and Science Council at the time that gave them a $300 grant, a grassroots grant for one of their productions. In the 90s, they became an operating support partner of the Arts and Science Council. And if Dawn could put the slide on the screen that you will see, you can clearly see the inequities related to funding and operating support over the 13 years where the Afro-American Children's Theater was receiving funding compared to Children's Theater of Charlotte. Again, this is ASC's doing, and this is why it was important to apologize. When the Afro-American Children's Theater stopped receiving funding in fiscal year 2004, I just wanted to share with you an example of the total dollars in the 13 Theater of Charlotte. Here are two organizations focusing on children's theaters. One focuses on African American experience. The other is not, that's not their main focus, while they do now do performances related to different cultures. But that is a clear example as to why ASC needed to apologize for being complicit in our work.
ASC has been working on this issue of equity for some time now. It's not something that just started. Tell us a little bit about what's been happening over the last several years.
So one example that I want to share about our work in cultural equity is really supporting creative individuals. There is an artist here named Will Jenkins who also goes by Sir Will or Simplistic Phobia. He's the co-owner of Black Market, that came to us with an idea about how could he use his with a cultural vision grant that and then buy an equipment of a large format printer to do his work. Out of that led to more funding with an artist support grant, as well as being a participant in our community supported art program that really connects art collectors to doing work within Elder Gallery, local street, and even participated in the Black Lives Matter mural that was on North Tryon Street. So we believe that our investment in creative individuals is very important. Equity is about everyone having the resources that they need to move along together. And so that is just one example of how ASCs work in equity. And one more thing, as it relates to organizations, Jazz Art Charlotte, we have been supporting Jazz Art Charlotte for many, many years. Lonnie and O.C. Davis moved here from New Orleans, from Hurricane Katrina, and we provided them in the beginning with, I believe, a $2,000 grant to support the Ellis Marcellus Quintet. And now they are receiving operating support from ASC, but they've moved to that level through project support, operating support category 1, and just having that support that they need, that now they're receiving operating support in the category 2 and over $600,000 budget with full paid staff.
That's wonderful. It shows that we're making progress along the way.
Yes.
That's terrific. Can you share more about what else is driving this work?
So what is driving the work is ASC's is the Cultural Vision Plan, a plan that the community articulated to us how they want the cultural sector to serve them. And that was through 3 things. Number 1, building community, providing experiences that build connections and build bridges across difference. The second one is increase relevant and innovative programming for a changing population, and also close to where people live. We understand that we have to come uptown for the mountaintop experience, Hamilton or the Color Purple on Broadway, but people want experiences close to where they live. The other part of that is that and the third one is they wanted art, science, and history to be central to pre-K through 12 education, ensuring that our children become critical and for a 21st century workforce. What, again, the residents asked. With Mecklenburg County, as well as Parks and Recreation Library, where we know various geographic areas, cultural life happening there. There's not community listening and learning about the cultural experiences that in their equity work. And more importantly, are from our
Side readers, and I'm going to hand off first to
Okay, thank you. Well, just a little context. I have been lucky to work in the nonprofit sector my entire career, and I was on the ASC board for 2 full terms, and then actually had the chance to work for ASC. So ASC board member, ASC staff person, and now I am still currently on the board of the Blumenthal Performing Arts. So very, very invested in the cultural sector, and was asked to be a reader, as you were. And I found the data, we read like 4 different versions of the report. What was even more interesting to me, I got a lot of phone calls from people after the report came out, and a lot of, clearly I was on the board and I worked there. I am complicit in the systems that were in play. I'm struck by how many people I know who were in similar situations, therefore complicit, and felt defensive. And so I have just spent some time with just thinking about how you can move forward with full understanding and not getting too blocked up with the emotional reaction of the negative. So a little bit of perspective on my role as a reader.
Well, I've been in Charlotte for 6 years and have served on a number of committees, including the Leading on Opportunity Task Force that concluded that in Charlotte we have 2 Charlottes, one that is thriving and one that is not thriving, and pointed out some of the inequities in our community, not as it relates only to economic mobility, but also as it relates to education, housing, healthcare, and a number of issues. And one area that I had not thought at all about was the area of culture and arts. So I was interested to learn that there is a definition for cultural equity. We talk about academic equity, we talk about, I thought it was extremely interesting, and was glad to be able to share. Also, our church has been hosting the cultural blocks, and then we were blessed to have as a parishioner here for many years, Mrs. Clara Jones, whose piano and music school was one of the leading piano and music programs in Charlotte-Mecklenburg.
Absolutely. Well, I wish we could be all in person, but I do want to thank you for allowing us to at least have this conversation together. This is the part where we really do want to engage with those of you who have signed up to be part of this conversation. I know several people had sent in a comment from a woman out there. And this is in response to just the open-ended, share your thoughts, feelings, and experiences about ASC and its cultural equity journey. She said, and I quote, "Every time I see race named as a diversity standard, I struggle because race alone does not supremacy or equity risk takers instead of other external labels." I thought that was interesting.
Thanks for sharing that, Kristen. And I have one that I want to share as well that's come in, democracy, in ways in which we're not learning in schools because the civic curriculum has been eroded so much. What do you think artists can do to help us with that?
Well, I do think one of the great things about artists is they also make it more enjoyable. Like there's an experiential component to consuming information and education in a way.
Like Hamilton, you know,
exactly, exactly.
Who would have thought we would have learned the founding father's story through a
Apologies for the technical difficulties. We're going to pause everything, fix the technical difficulties, and then come back. But thank you all for your patience. Please stand by.